Moving into part 2 of our deformers lesson, I want to cover a few more deformers that I haven't touched on yet. So I'll start with a tension deformer. I'll go with the simple cylinder here, subdivide this, a bit much. Alright, so now I'm going to smooth this out. Let's pretend I kind of have like a little bit of a capsule here. So what I want to do is add a tension deformer to the top vertices. So I'm going to select my top vertex and then shift grow my selection. So that's less than or greater than symbol. So let's say I want to add a tension to about this much of my, my object. With that selected under deform, I'm going to choose tension. You'll see that not much will be happening here. Now if I select the top vertex, however, and let's say I grow my selection just maybe one row, and then if I grab the move tool and move this, here it is. So this is kind of tension at work. You'll notice that as I grab the vertices and move them up, or let's say I bring them down, bring them up, you'll see that it's essentially kind of having this fall off to the other vertices on the object, and that's creating that tension. If I go into the tension attributes, you can see that I have some constraints. This is easier to kind of see in action. So once you move the components around, you can kind of see how this affects the other vertices. All right, so that is the tension deformer. Again, the rest of these attributes are just sort of, something to play with. There's the strength, there's the shear, and again, you may have to actually deform this a little bit to see how everything reacts. All right, moving on. Let's talk about the wire deformer. I'm going to create a simple plane, and then let me switch to the top view. I want to create a curve. So I'll just go with the simple curve tool here. All right. So what I want to happen is I want this curve to deform my flat plane. Let me switch to my wireframe on shaded. Then I'm going to click on deform and then choose wire. So I'm going to select the surface, hit return, and then select the curve and also hit return. And then right click and choose control vertex just so we can see what's going on here. And when I move this up, let me press 3 so it's a little bit easier to see here. All right, I don't have a lot of control vertices here, so obviously this isn't affecting the surface as well as it could, but you can see that nonetheless the curve is altering the shape of the surface below the plane that it's attached to. That is the wire deformer. All right, so I'm just going to keep on moving on. The next one is the curved warp. So I'm going to create simple type, and then actually may as well just type that in so we can see what we're working with here. I'm going to bring down the font size. No need to have it be huge here. It's good enough. I don't really need to mess with the text. I'm just using this for trial purposes. Switch to this front view. Once again, I want to draw a curve. So let me just add one here. All right. I'm going to select the surface, the mesh, with the curve. And then under deform, I'm going to do my curve warp. So as you can see, the mesh essentially kind of snaps to this curved surface. And then in the attribute editor, if you go into the curve warp tab, you can kind of test out how and where you want to position this. So the offset will let me actually move my text through the curve, there's a scale. This is kind of a neat one too. And again, if I right click and look at this, I have the option to set a key for keyframing. There's a max scale, so I can set that as well. And there's a scale curve, so I can actually kind of customize how I want this text to look. There's the curve rotation. So all of these sort of attributes that you can test out, see how it kind of moves around, rotates around the curve here. And then there's the twist rotation as well. So this one's fun. This one's actually fun to play with. And again, the offset will allow you to move your text or any surface. I just use text as an example, but any mesh really, you can use that along the curve warp. All right, so that is curve warp. Let's move on to a few more. So we have, looking here, we have a shrink wrap. Let's go over that one real quick. So I'm going to use, let me pick a little bit more of a complex surface. So I'll go with this super shape, or maybe the gear. The gear is good enough. Okay, so I have the gear, and then I'm going to create a plane. So the way you select these objects will matter. The result will matter. So if I try, let's say I select the gear first and then the plane. If I go under deform and do a shrink wrap, you can see that the gear essentially snaps to the plane, as opposed to the other way around. Now, if I select the plane first and then the gear, go to deform and then do a shrink wrap. So essentially this plane, and I can kind of move it through, let me hit 3 here. So literally a shrink wrap. So this surface is going to stick to the surface of the gear. Imagine it being, a shrink wrapped object. So that's how this works. Pretty cool. Pretty neat. Now, the more subdivisions, the higher resolution of a model that you have, you may end up with a better result as well. So again, with the shrink wrap, it's a matter of selecting the order in which you select the objects, and that will really matter. And then if this is kind of the result you're looking for, here it is. So that is the shrink wrap, and that actually, and then I have one more. I did want to show one more. Let's talk about cluster. This one is great for when we get into any sort of rigging, but just to show you what a cluster deformer does, let's say I have, I'm going to draw a curve again. Oh, here it is. Okay. So let's say I have a curve. It doesn't have to be, in any sort of shape. I could have just drawn a flat one, but here it is. And then I have my control vertices. So let's say I want to create some sort of a controller, in the sense that will control these vertices here. So let's say I want these vertices to be manipulated somehow. Instead of having me always select these and then move them up, I want some sort of essentially a controller, a deformer, that does that for me. So with these selected, if I go under deform, choose cluster, that puts in the cluster handle, and now this handle alone is going to allow me to move those vertices. So it's just a little easier. So I can just click on this C, the cluster handle. It's a little easier of just controlling this, right, rather than going into this marking menu, choosing control vertex, selecting the vertices. Just really simplifies the process. Let's say I want a cluster handle on this end of the curve. Same thing, deform, and then I'll choose cluster.